Hari Om. In the last session, we have completed Bhagavad Gita chapter 16, and today we will proceed ahead with chapter 17 of the Bhagavad Gita, which is entitled Shraddha Traya Vibhaga Yoga. Shraddha means faith, Traya means three types, Vibhaga means division. So here the Lord will divide the faith in three categories, that is Sattvic, Rajasic and Tamasic faith. Now in chapters 13, 14 and 15, which are linked to the final 6 chapters of the Gita from 13 to 18, so there in those 3 chapters, Krishna spoke about Jnanam or Brahma Jnanam or Atma Jnanam as the means to liberation. And then in chapters 16 and 17, Krishna wants to advise what is the correct lifestyle for a spiritual person to follow so that we can what we call cultivate the right mindset to receive this knowledge, because this knowledge is very subtle, it's not easy to grasp. So one must have the right mindset. So in chapter 16, the Lord spoke about the 20 divine qualities which will give a spiritual seeker the right mindset to what we call to receive and absorb this knowledge. And now in chapter 17, Krishna will talk about the 4 types of disciplines. That is yajna, the type of food that we should eat. Ahara, the type of food that we should eat. Yajna, how we should do our prayers and rituals. Dhanam, how we should offer charity. And tapaha, how we should maintain our austerities. So ahara, yajna, dana, tapa are the 4 disciplines. If we practice it the sattvic way, it will develop a right mindset to receive and absorb this spiritual knowledge. So also in the last chapter 16, Krishna concluded that one must learn and act according to the injunctions of the scriptures. So where should we get our knowledge? Is from the scriptures. But there are generally 3 types of people. Number 1, those who know about the teachings of the scriptures, but they choose to ignore them, either because they have no faith in the words of the scriptures or because they are so much overpowered by their strong desires that they do not want to follow the teachings of the scriptures. The second group of people are those who know about the scriptures, the teachings, they follow with faith, they undertake the actions which are enjoined in the scriptures, they avoid actions that are prohibited, and these are what we call the divine people. And finally, there is a third group of people who do not know anything about the scriptures, either due to laziness, but with faith they follow all the spiritual practices as taught to them by their elders. They do not violate the injunction of the scriptures. So what category do they fall in? Are they demoniac or are they divine? So in this chapter, Krishna will raise this matter and he will explain to Arjuna that faith is according to our own inner nature. According to our own inner nature, we will be inclined to that type of faith. So let us now, with this understanding, let us dwell now into the first verse of chapter 17. So the scriptures list all the right actions we must perform. However, not everyone has access to the scriptures for a variety of reasons. Either they cannot understand the Sanskrit terminology, or they might not have a right guru to interpret to them the teachings of the scriptures. So just like one cannot just buy a medical textbook, read and practice and become a doctor. So whatever we have learned so far, maybe from our elders or by observing what other learned people are doing, and with faith we follow, as we are interested to follow a religious lifestyle. We therefore perform all our religious duties, we do prayers, rituals with faith and devotion, but we do not know, are we doing it according to the scriptures or not? We may be even violating some of the injunctions of the scriptures. So, what is the faith or the nature of our faith? Is it sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic? And this is what Arjuna wants to know. So, Arjuna asked the question in verse 1 of chapter 17. He says, O Lord, yea, there are those people who yajante, they adore you, they perform your worship, they do all sorts of puja and rituals, yajante, but they utsrijya. Utsrijya means they ignore or neglect the shastra, the scriptures, vidim, the instructions of the scriptures. So these people are scripturally illiterate. They may not have the knowledge from the scriptures, but they just follow the tradition of what their forefathers have been doing. And with faith, they perform these pujas and rituals. Okay, they, without knowing whether they are following it correctly according to the scriptures or not. So, however, he says, such a person who performs these prayers and rituals without getting the knowledge from the scriptures, yet they are anvitaha, they are endowed with shraddhaya, immense faith. They have faith in God. They have faith in their prayers and their rituals. He says, two, however, what is the nishta? What is the steadfastness? Or how true are these kind of devotees? How would you classify the steadfastness in faith of these devotees? Is it, Arjuna asks, is it sattvam or rajasic or tamasic? How is such a kind of prayer by people who perform rituals and prayers from what they have seen other people perform or what they've learned from their forefathers without really understanding the true nature or the right way of performing these prayers? Is it sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic? So in verse number 2 now, Krishna replies to Arjuna's question. So if a person is leading a religious life according to scriptural injunctions, so there is no question that person is a sattvic person with a divine nature, as he is following the instructions in accordance to the scriptures. However, a person who has no knowledge of the scriptures, what will guide him in the way he or she performs his prayers or rituals? So what is it that guides a person who has no knowledge from the scriptures? Under what circumstances are they following? And if what we call to guide a person is actually by their own nature. So what is their inherent nature? In that way they will follow their prayers and their rituals also. So if the scriptures don't guide us, then what is it that guides us? That's what we want to know. So the Lord says here, Saha, that Shraddha, that faith, the devotion of a Dehinam. Dehinam means an embodied person. A person, basically any human being, who has no knowledge of his scriptures, then where is the origin of his faith? Where is the nature of his faith coming from? If he's taking the advice from the scriptures, then there is no question that his faith is pure, his faith is sattvic. But if a person has no knowledge of the scriptures, then what is the nature of his faith? The Lord says, Bhavati is therefore Swabhavaja. It is born out of that person's own inner nature. So our faith is guided by our own inner nature. And of course, our own inner nature is a result or accumulation of the past actions also. So since human beings are of different nature, therefore their worship or their faith also will be of the three types: sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic. And all this inner nature is based on our actions conducted in past life, which have been carried forward into this present life also. So, in Ramayana, we find that three brothers born in the same family, three brothers, but they all of different nature. Vibhishan was Sattvic, Ramana was Rajasic, Kumbhakaran was Tamasic. And they led spiritual lives according to their own nature. So the Lord says, the faith of a person who has no knowledge of the scriptures is according to his own nature, which is trivida, which is threefold. What is the threefold nature? Satviki, Rajasi, Tamasi. Satvik, Rajas and Tamas also. So, Krishna says to Arjuna, Srunu, may you now hear this. Srunu iti, may you now hear this tam about the three types of faith. So in verse number 3 now, the Lord starts to talk about the three types of faith. So the Lord says, the Shraddha, the faith of Sarvasya, every being, every human being who has no knowledge of the scriptures is Bhavati, is formed Anurupa, in accordance with Sattva. Sattva here does not mean Sattvic, it means the nature of the internal organs. So the Lord is saying in verse number 3 that the faith of every being is formed by, in accordance with the nature of their internal equipment, which is known as Antakarana, internal equipment, which is the mind and the intellect. That's why the saying is, as the mind of a person, that is his or her nature. A person behaves according to the nature of their inner equipment. So the Lord says, Ayam Purusha, this person, every person, is a product of their own inner nature, and thus a person's Shraddhamayo, a person's faith, is made up of the inner nature. As the quality of your mind, as the nature of your mind, so will be the nature of your faith also. And again, I stress, the nature of a mind is of everybody's mind is based on everybody's individual past actions. So the Lord says, Yo, therefore, yak shraddhaha, whatever faith a person has, whatever be a person's faith, sattvic, rajasic or tamasic, sa eva, that is how he will behave. What is the nature of the mind will translate into the faith of the person, and it will translate into the actions, how he prays, how he performs rituals, etc., etc. So now we go to verse number 4. So if a person follows his own nature to worship, how will each guna express itself in spiritual practices of an individual? So there are three types of worshippers mentioned in this verse, and it all depends. So how will the nature of a person express out into the way he worships? One factor is the type of deity that they are attracted to. Okay, and there are many types of deities also. Second factor is what type of worship attracts me. Silent, peaceful type of worship, noisy, loud type of worship. And so all these factors we can see expressed from the person's nature also. So first, if we look at the type of deities, there are a group of deities described in the scriptures to be worshipped for spiritual growth, like Rama, Krishna, Shiva, Devi, Ganesha. So there are many deities also mentioned like that. To be worshipped if one wants what we call spiritual growth. Then there are also deities like Kubera. People worship Kubera not because they're interested in spiritual growth, they're interested more in material growth. And then there are also tamasic devatas, which are like the ghosts and the spirits which are worshipped by those tamasic people. So then, of course, as I said, mode of worship, whether you prefer quiet worship, loud type of worship, or what type of worship. And thirdly, of course, is the motive of worship. So, with what motive do I do the worship? Do I do it to gain spiritual growth, inner strength, or is my motive of worship is to gain material benefits, or is my motive of worship to destroy others? So motive also plays a role. So the Lord says, Janaha, people of sattvic nature. Okay. So now in verse number 4, the Lord is now saying here that men of sattvic nature, okay, Janaha yajante, they worship sattvic devans, they worship the sattvic gods. They pray to the sattvic gods for their spiritual growth. And generally, when we talk about the sattvic gods, sattvic devas, they fall under the 5 main groups of deities to be worshipped according to Sankaracharya. One is worship of Vishnu, which includes worship of Rama, Krishna, etc. Second is worship of Shiva and the different forms of Shiva. Third is Ganesha worship. Fourth is Durga worship or different forms of Mother Goddess. And 5 is Surya or the worship of the sun. The worship of the 12 Adityas, 8 Vasus, 11 Rudras, 2 Ashwini Kumaras, without any selfish motive is considered as sattvic worship. And then the Lord goes on to say, Anye, some others, the Rajasic type of people, due to their selfish nature, greedy nature, seeking more wealth, fame, power, position, they are attracted to worship of Yakshas. Yakshas are nature spirits. They are usually friendly and they are guardians of natural treasures hidden in the earth or tree roots. And Kubera is said to be the chief of all the Yakshas. And Kubera is often depicted as a dwarf with a big belly, 1 eye, 8 teeth, 3 legs, and carries in his hand a mace and a bag of money. So there is one popular story that Kubera loaned money to Lord Venkateshwara for his marriage to Padmavati. So the tradition is the devotees of Venkateshwara, they go to Tirupati to donate money to the Lord to pay back his debt to Kubera. It is a story told. And so this is one of the stories. So he says Rajasic people will worship Yakshas and Rakshas. Rakshas are the demonic spirits. And what we call in the Puranas, there's also a story told when Lord Brahma was sleeping at the end of Satya Yuga, from his breath the Rakshasas were born. And Rakshasas are flesh-eating creatures, so they wanted to eat Lord Brahma. And Lord Brahma cried out to Lord Vishnu, Rakshama, protect me. And Vishnu came and banished all the Rakshas to the earth. And this is how the demonic spirits came to be known as Rakshasas. So Rajasic people who are seeking more material gain will worship either the Yakshas or the Rakshas. Another group of people, Tamasic nature, they worship Pretan, ghosts, and Bhuta Ganams, hosts of spirits. And all these ghosts and evil spirits who have had a trouble or painful death, seeking some form of vengeance. Thus, Tamasic people invoke them to destroy others. So that is what Tamasic people worship. Now in verse number 5, Krishna will discuss about the mode of worship, which is also very important. The mode of worship also is of 3 types. So in verse number 5, the Lord says, Ye janaha, those people who are samyuktaha, they are fully identified with what? Dhamba. Dhamba means ostentation. They like to perform rituals and prayers with great pomp and show just for the sake of showing off to others how great, how religious they are. So they are also endowed with ahamkar, pride. So to show off their wealth, the way they throw lavish prayers, the amount of things they offer in the prayers, so all these things. So they are anvitaha, they are possessed or driven by three things: kama, excessive desires; raga, attachment; bala, which is power or strength. So their minds are continuously occupied by kama, means desire for what they don't have, and that's why they perform rituals to get more of what they don't have. Raga, by being attached to what they have, so they don't want to lose what they have, and also bala, to show off their power and their strength. So the Lord says these people tapyante, they undertake all kinds of ghoram, severe tapas, severe types of austerities, which are not, he says, vihitam, they are not sanctioned by the Shastras. They just undertake such kind of severe austerities which the scriptures don't even prescribe. So that is when there are no such practices, but people still want to follow. They think that the more severe austerities they keep, the more benefit they will get from Bhagavad. So they follow all kinds of severe austerities which is not even prescribed in the scriptures. So the Lord says that this type of this type of people who perform all these type of prayers. Now, example, if we just look at fasting. Fasting is prescribed in the scriptures for the purpose of sense control. But when one observes such severe fasting that the health of the body is destroyed, then it is not in accordance with the teachings of the scriptures. So austerities can be observed within limits, and one should not overdo and cause damage to one's health. That is important. And that brings us to verse number 6, where the Lord carries on to explain about this, what we call the Rajasic and Tamasic type of what we call faith. So now Krishna is elaborating in verse number 6 about the severe austerities practiced by some people. He says, Sarirashtam, the body, which is made up of Kramam, a combination of Bhuta, 5 elements, ether, air, fire, water and earth. By practicing severe austerities, they karshayanta, they weaken, they destroy, they emaciate the body. And the Lord says, not only do they hurt the physical body, but they forget the important teachings of the scriptures, where the Lord says, I exist in all the bodies. So this body is a temple where the Lord is residing. So the Lord says by practicing such severe austerities, like what we call harming, hurting the body, severe fasting, torturing the body, Lord says they are also torturing anta sharirastam. The Lord who is residing in the body, they are also torturing me, the Lord says. So no doubt we should not pamper the body and become addicted to sense pleasures. Okay, but whenever we do this kind of practices, we must practice according to our limits and for the purpose of what we call advancing spiritually also. The purpose is not to harm the body, the purpose is to purify the mind also. So pampering the body, of course, is dangerous, but damaging the body is also another extreme also. Okay, and furthermore, all these are not prescribed in the scriptures. Severely torturing or destroying the body is definitely not prescribed in the scriptures. So the Lord says, with thee may you know that such kind of people who practice severe austerities and torture or hurt the body are asura nishchayan. They are possessed of demoniacal tendencies. They are not following the teachings of the scriptures. They are just practicing austerities according to their inner tendencies. They think wrongly that the more severe the austerities, the more results they will get from Bhagavad. And the Lord concludes by saying, Achetasaha, they do not have proper intellectual understanding. So they are devoid of intellectual understanding. So even though every human being has an intellect to understand the scriptures and has access to gurus, they choose not to gain the right knowledge and instead they follow their own nature. Thus, based on type of deity, based on mode of worship, based on motive of worship, we have to evaluate what type of faith we have. Is it sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic? So, Krishna will now talk about how also to practice 4 other types of practices, and in that way we can also evaluate according to the food we consume, the way how we offer our prayers, the way how we perform charity, and the way we keep austerities. Ahara, Yakya, Dana, Tapa. These 4 practices we can use to evaluate are we being sattvic or rajasic or tamasic, and how do we transform ourselves. If we find that what we are doing is rajasic, tamasic, how do we transform ourselves to sattvic? So first of all, here in verse number 4, here the Lord talks about those 4 practices. They are ahara. Ahara means food. Yajna, sacrifice or type of pujas or rituals, how should we perform them the correct way. Tapaha, austerities. And number 4, dhanam, giving of charity. 4 practices, very practical guide that Krishna wants to explain to us, because all these 4 are for human beings to practice. So Krishna says not only is the faith is of 3 kinds, but he says ahara, the food which is priya, which is dear to all, sarvasya bhavati, is of trivida. Food is of 3 types. So food is classified into 3 categories. And not only food, the Lord says tatha, also yajna, sacrifices in the forms of puja and rituals, tapas, austerities, number 4, dhanam, charity also is of 3 types. So the Lord says, Shrunu, may you listen, imam, to this bedam, to this classification. The 3-fold division of Tesham. The 3-fold, that means food is of 3 types, yajna is of 3 types, tapas is of 3 types, dhanam is of 3 types. That is sattvic, rajasic, tamasic, which Krishna says he will now explain by giving the breakdown. So let us now look at first verse number 8, 9 and 10, where Krishna will talk about sattvic food, rajasic food and tamasic food. So why is food so important to our spiritual growth? We may ask this question. According to the scriptures, the type of food we intake affects the very nature of our mind. In the Chandogya Upanishad, it is written, ahara suddhau sattva suddhi, sattva suddhau dhruva smriti, dhruva smriti lambhe sarva grantitam vipra moksha. Ahara suddhau, from purity of food comes sattva suddhi, comes purity of mind. Sattva suddhau, from purity of mind comes dhruva smriti, comes constant remembrance of divine things or of God. And dhruva smriti, from constant remembrance of God, lambhe sarva grantitam, one becomes free from all bondage, vipra moksha, one becomes liberated. So in the Upanishads also, food is divided into 3 components. There's a gross layer which nourishes our gross body. So our skin, blood, bones are all nourished by the type of food that we eat. Then there is a subtle layer in every food that nourishes our mind and intellect. And the 3rd layer is called a waste product, which is expelled. So every food has a gross, a subtle and a waste item in it. The gross part of the food affects the gross body, subtle part of the food affects the subtle body, which is the mind, and then the waste product, which is all expelled. Therefore, on the spiritual path, one must place close attention to the type of food we intake, and we must also keep in mind that along with food, there are other factors that will help. So here Krishna gives a description of sattvic food. He is not going to mention the type of foods, or it is not mentioning specific vegetables or fruits that we should eat, but a general idea of what are sattvic foods. And we will come back in the next recording and take a look at what are the sattvic, rajasic and tamasic foods. Hari Om Tat Sat.